It's going to be a good week. Welcome to the Neverending Reading Vlog. 2 weeks ago, I read V for Vendetta by Alan Moore, and I loved it. Loved the movie, loved the graphic novel. Now I'm reading Watchmen and From Hell. I watched the Watchmen movie years ago when it first came out. I know very little about From Hell except the fact that it's a historical fiction about Jack the Ripper. I love thrillers. I love serial killer stories. I think From Hell's going to be right up my alley. These three graphic novels that I will tackle in a 3 week period are considered the trifecta of Alan Moore's great graphic novels. He's had a very successful, extensive career. He writes novels now, he's written short stories, written lots of comics, graphic novels. Alan Moore is a very interesting, eccentric individual. The lore of Moore, Alan Moore, is very, very strange. He's an author I've always been interested in, and I'm just now getting into his work. He tackles a lot of interesting ideas. He has a lot of strange subject matter in his works, and I think this week's going to be a very weird reading week. I'm hoping I could pick off these two graphic novels, and then next week I'll be prepared to finish Lonesome Dove. I'm going to read probably a few hundred pages of Lonesome Dove, but I'm not going to talk too much about it on this vlog because next week I want it to be a completely focused Lonesome Dove reading vlog. But I'm excited to be reading some more of Alan Moore. I'm really enjoying Alan Moore week. I read the first 20% of Watchmen and the first 10% of From Hell. From Hell, it starts off with two old friends. They're on a beach and they're discussing Bloody September from long ago when Jack the Ripper was at large, and you're basically made aware that they had a key of information. I'm really enjoying Alan Moore week. I read the first 20% of The Watchmen and the first 10% of From Hell. They're both very compelling so far. The artwork in Watchmen is much better. I was actually kind of surprised by how bare bones the artwork was in the beginning of From Hell. It was sort of hard to follow what was happening, so I got the Master Edition, which adds color, and I'm enjoying that reading experience a lot more. From Hell opens up with two old friends on a beach, and they're discussing the Bloody September when Jack the Ripper was at large, and they're guilty about selling out, about hiding a key piece of information about the infamous serial killer, and we're figuring out what exactly it is that they had to do with Jack the Ripper. Very compelling stuff. I can't wait to see where the mystery ends. The Watchmen, I'm pretty sure you're familiar with it. Alan Moore's realistic take on superheroes, and I would not say it's grimdark. I would say it's definitely realistic. Grimdark is gritty for grittiness sake. This one's just real and raw. The superheroes in this world, they're not super. Only Mr. Manhattan, Dr. Manhattan, only he actually has superpowers. The rest are just masked vigilantes. And they fought in the Vietnam War, and they have PTSD, and they are not paragons of virtue. They're all kind of despicable and pathetic in their own ways, and they're dealing with their traumas in very different ways. And they're all at different stages of life. Some of them are working for the government, some of them are still being vigilantes, and others have moved past that part of their life. They're now living as regular civilians. But something, a great mystery, is kind of bringing them all back into this world when a former teammate of them, the comedian, an old-time vigilante, ends up unalived. He got pushed through a window in his apartment building, and they're wondering what happened to him. Right now, we're kind of just going through the history of the comedian, how he relates to all the other characters in The Watchmen that are still alive, and he was a piece of work, a very troubled soul. But I find him very easy to have empathy for, despite the fact that he was a horrible piece of human trash. The world is probably better off without the comedian in it, but we are still mourning his loss because he represents something that is happening. And I'm interested to see how the mysteries of both of these graphic novels conclude. Quite exciting. Guys, something neat just happened. History has been made. I woke up this morning, I open up my phone, and there's a breaking news story. And it's very relevant to what I'm reading this week. They now know who Jack the Ripper was. They found conclusive DNA evidence that ties an individual to one of the crime scenes. They had a DNA match to excretions that were left on one of the victim's shawls, and they now know with very high probability the identity of Jack the Ripper. And this week, I'm reading a graphic novel about Jack the Ripper. So that's exciting. It's kind of neat. It's weird when things like that work out. All the stars align. So I'm reading From Hell at the perfect time. Jack the Ripper is in the headlines. A lot of people are probably going to look up Jack the Ripper, look up adaptations, figure out about From Hell. So I think a lot of people, more people, not a lot of people, the graphic novel's quite old, are going to be reading From Hell. And that's exciting because I'm ahead of the curve by 48 hours. I know you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but I think it's fair to judge graphic novels by their artwork. And let me put it on the screen for you guys. This is The Watchmen. This is From Hell. The difference in quality is huge. If I'm just judging these graphic novels based on the artwork, The Watchmen's going to be much better. I know that's not how stories work, even graphic novels, but initial impressions, I think Watchmen's going to be the better one. Returning to the topic of artwork, I came across something very interesting, a debate online that I was not privy to that I'm finding very humorous. I just learned that there was a colored version and a black and white version of From Hell. Originally, it was published in black and white, and it was all shades, it was all dark, it was all sketch looking, and I wasn't liking that art style. I'm not going to lie, that's one of the main reasons why I was saying that the artwork in Watchmen was just of a higher quality. But the artwork in From Hell makes sense when you consider that the story takes place in the late 1800s, before the turn of the century. This was the era of penny dreadfuls. This was the era of short horror stories that were gothic, being published in newspapers for all the lower class masses to read. The artwork in From Hell makes a lot more sense when you consider it in that context, because From Hell is a story of Jack the Ripper. Nothing is more gothic, nothing is more creepy, nothing is more scary to the people of that time than a man hiding amongst the slum and squalor of the lower class neighborhoods and hunting down helpless victims. But I started reading the colored version of From Hell, and I like it so much. There are a lot of people in the comic book and manga community that look down on people who read the colorized versions of the manga or comic. It's sacrilege to them. They're all talking about how that's not the artist's original intent, and if you're a real comic book or manga fan, you will read it in the original art form, which is the black and white. And it just seems so silly to me, because these comics and these manga become TV shows and anime, and people don't complain about that. I feel like whatever makes the story more consumable, whatever makes it easier for more people to pick up and enjoy the story, we should be happy about that. I think it's just a bunch of elitist posturing about, art styles and the best way to depict the medium. I feel like a lot of these guys are just trying to gatekeep these fandoms, and it's silly. I can appreciate the black and white from Hell, but I'm going to stick to the colorized version. Way easier to follow. Saturday, I finished Watchmen, and I really, really liked it. I liked it more than V for Vendetta, and I like V for Vendetta a lot. I love the ending. I love how the main plot and the 5 or 6 subplots all touch on very similar themes. Themes like alienation, themes like free will, about the value of human life, about whether or not anything matters. And if nothing does matter in life, is that really such a bad thing? This book talks a lot about absurdism and good and evil and utilitarian values versus other types of values. It was very philosophical, and I loved the ending. I've heard that a lot of people complain about the ending of Watchmen. I don't see it. I found it to be very thought-provoking, quite moving, and dare I say, hopeful. I was under the impression that this was considered grimdark or gritty. And I would say yes, it is more dark than noble, right? It was more dark than most classical comic books or graphic novels or manga, but I would just say it's realistic. I don't think the villains or the bad guys in this book are overly bad. I think it's quite a realistic level of evil. The people that do bad things in this book, they have pretty reasonable reasons for what they do. And it checks out. It makes sense. I really loved how everything at the end of this book kind of tied together. I really loved our characters. I loved how even the most despicable of characters, the more you learned about their backstories, the easier it was to kind of see their point of view. I dare say there was no true villain in Watchmen, and there's some pretty heinous stuff that happened, so that's kind of neat. I love Dr. Manhattan. I love Rorschach. I even like comedian. He's kind of a tragic hero type figure. I feel a lot of empathy for the comedian. You know, the Owl guy, Spectre. All of them are pretty dang good characters. I just wish it was longer. I wish there was a prequel to The Watchmen where it talks about the Minutemen. But alas, Alan Moore hates comics now, so we will never get that. Now I just gotta finish From Hell tomorrow. And From Hell, the first 3 chapters in particular, is just a massive series of info dumps about architecture and the history of all these buildings and historical sites throughout London. Very dense. But after chapter 4, 5, 6, it's really fast moving. I should finish it pretty early tomorrow. Yes, Alan Moore. 3 of his graphic novels in February. Pretty good start to the month. That was a wild ride. From Hell by Alan Moore was definitely the craziest graphic novel I've ever read. There's so many things in this story. It's not just about a serial killer. There is a grand conspiracy, there's Freemasons, there's government corruption, there's the occult, there's magic, there's psychics, and the Jack the Ripper part is over about 2/3 of the way through the story. The last third is just a very strange falling action sequence. I loved the several endings we got in this story. I love where all of our surviving characters end off. And the themes of this graphic novel, themes like alienation, very similar to Watchmen, themes like powerlessness, themes like being unable to escape your destiny, very similar to Watchmen. Obviously, From Hell is much darker. We are following a prolific serial unaliver, but you understand this character, and the identity of Jack the Ripper is shown. He's revealed very, very, early into the novel, and he's such a compelling character. There's also this other character in the narrative. He's a stand-in for the reader because this person's completely ignorant to how the real world works, and he's being exposed to this dark underbelly of society, and just like the reader, he's being driven mad. He's being disturbed. His entire worldview is being flipped upside down, and watching this character go through those stages is very compelling. I love our ladies of the night. I love the characters. It was very easy to feel empathy for them. The squalor of this neighborhood was portrayed and depicted so well. I could just feel the poverty through the pages. I could feel the desperation. I could feel the hopelessness. And it's so well researched. Before every chapter, Alan Moore has excerpts from different historical accounts from the real Jack the Ripper case and different works of, biographies and different authors that wrote about Jack the Ripper and different philosophers and different this. It's a very, very ambitious work. It encompasses so many topics. Alan Moore loves talking about secret societies. He loves talking about the occult. He loves talking about things that are related to chaos magic. This graphic novel, From Hell, definitely fits the dark academia aesthetic. It was so creepy and disturbing, and it's definitely one of those graphic novels that before I do a full-length review video of it, I'm going to go, turning through the pages, because there are some scenes that you just have to read twice. I can't wait to talk about this graphic novel more in depth. I enjoyed Watchmen more. From Hell was a little bit more glacial with its pacing, but overall, I think From Hell, my first initial reaction might be slightly better, slightly more interesting, slightly more special. But we'll see how I feel. Cause I've read both these graphic novels. I finished them the last 48 hours or so. It was a pretty dang good week. I also finished part one of Lonesome Dove, so part two will at least be finished next week. Perhaps I'll even be finishing Lonesome Dove next week. This week was pretty dang good. But next week will be even better. This was just definitely a week where it just rejuvenated me as a reader. I had some really good fun, and I learned a lot, and I thought about a lot of interesting things. The total for 2025 so far, I have read 7 novels, 3 graphic novels, 4 short stories, and some chapters of various mangas. I'll get the volume countdown for you guys next week. Let's keep this momentum going.